Hey guys, so today we're going to just review graphing, all of the graphing. We're going to just try to put it all together. And there's going to be some problems that I want you to do and then upload them into Canvas for me so that I can make sure that you know how to graph because we do have a test coming up. So I want you to take a second and I want you to graph this one here. So it's y equals 5 cosine of 4x. So the amplitude here is going to be 5. The period is going to be, it's a cosine, so it's going to be 2 pi divided by the absolute value of 4. So the period here is going to be pi over 2. Okay. So that means my x values are going to have to be shrunk a little bit because my period is normally 2 pi. So I want to go from 0 all the way to pi over 2. Okay, so I'm going to divide that pi over 2 by 4. So that's going to be what? Pi over 8 will be your next value. Pi over 8 plus pi over 8 is 2 pi over 8. And then 3 pi over 8, and then 4 pi over 8, which gives me pi over 2. Okay, so the y value here, the corresponding y value, so for cosine, so cosine of 0, because 4 times 0 is just 0, so cosine of 0 is going to be 1, and then a 1 times a 5. So remember, cosine is 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1. So here it's going to be 5, 0, negative 5, 0, and then back up to 5. So on anytime you graph for me, I do want you to make sure that you label the x-axis very clearly. Label the y-axis very clearly. Because same thing's going to happen on your test, and you are going to have to upload some of your work for me, and I'm going to look at your work and make sure it looks good. Okay, so at 0 we're going to be up at 5, at pi over 8 we're going to be at 0, at pi over 4 we're going to be at negative 5, 3 pi over 8, and then pi over 2. Okay, all right. So that was beautiful, wasn't it? Such a beautiful graph. Alright, so what about if I will ask you to graph a secant graph? Secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So I want to first graph the cosine graph, and then you can graph the secant graph from that. So the amplitude is going to be what? The absolute value of negative 2. So the amplitude is going to be a 2. The period is just going to be a 2 pi. So we'll go 0 all the way up to 2 pi. So it'll be 0 and divided by 4 here, so that's pi over 2. Pi. 3 pi over 2, and then 2 pi. So if I plug a 0 in here, 0, cosine of 0 is 1. Well, 1 times a negative 2, so this is going to be a negative 2, 0, 2, 0, negative 2. So we'll have 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Alright, so for our cosine curve, then we'll have a negative 2 and a positive 2 here. So at 0, we will be down at -2. At pi over 2, we will be at 0. At pi, we will be at 2. At 3 pi over 2, we will be at 0. And then at 2 pi, we will be at -2. So this is your cosine curve. So your secant curve is going to have an asymptote at pi over 2. It's going to have another one at 3 pi over 2. So that means that I am going to have a U-shaped graph in between both of these asymptotes. And if I were just to draw one period, this is what it would look like. But remember, so this would be basically a negative pi over 2 over here. And then that's would be U-shaped this way. So it'd be a 5 pi over 2 over here. Good deal? Alright. I want to talk a little bit about cotangent and tangent functions. This came up in tutorials some, so I just kind of wanted to address this. So cotangent and tangent are going to both have a period of pi. So if there's something inside of here, remember, then it would be pi divided by that b, the absolute value b. So if it was negative, it would definitely turn into a positive. Alright, so tangents, asymptotes, lie in between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. So the asymptotes live at negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. Okay, for tangent. For cotangent, the asymptotes are going to lie between 0 and pi. That's a period of a pi. This is a period of a pi here. Okay? But when there's something inside your tangent or your cotangent, okay, you need to set that inside of here. So what is your standard form for what, bx minus a c? This would be tangent bx minus a c. So when there is something inside of the function, then you would need to set that x, what it's bounded in between, you would need to put that bx minus c in between that 0 to pi if it's a cotangent. If it's a tangent, then you would need to set it in between negative pi over 2 and pi over 2. You would then isolate the x in between here, so you would isolate the x. So just like an inequality, isolate the x there, isolate the x. So then it creates new asymptotes. So if you isolate the x in the middle, then you will have new asymptotes. Y'all. Good deal. Alright, so let's do a cotangent here. So this is something really good to know. So this is tangent and this is cotangent here. Okay. Okay, you're not going to have an amplitude here. Your period is going to be pi divided by 2. So your period is going to be pi over 2 now. So cotangent lies, your asymptotes lie between 0 and pi. But I have this 2x inside of here, so we do need to then isolate that. So if I isolate it, it becomes 0 to pi over 2. So now your asymptotes for this cotangent graph are going to be at 0 and pi over 2. Okay, so if your asymptote is between 0 and pi over 2, it's going to cross the x-axis halfway in between 0 and pi over 2. So it's going to cross the x-axis at what? Pi over 4. This is going to be the 1/2 here and a negative 1/2. So halfway in between this distance here and halfway in between here. And remember, cotangent decreases throughout here. So this is what cotangent would look like. So when I'm asking you to graph this, this is what I am looking for, just to make sure that you can graph all of the aspects of it. Okay, so this is a sine curve, so the amplitude here is going to be a 2. This period, there is nothing right here, so this period is just going to be 2 pi divided by 1. But I've got this minus a 3 pi over 2, so I'm going to have a phase shift. So before I figure out my x values, let's take this period and find our normal x value. So 0, then it would be what, pi over 2. Basically you're dividing that by 4 and you're going to get 3 other values inside of here. So then this will be a pi, and then this will be 3 pi over, nope, not a 4, a 3 pi over 2. Okay. Alright, but I'm going to have a phase shift. So this means, this minus right here means I am going to have a phase shift. And that phase shift is going to shift it 3 pi over 2 to the right. Okay, so I'm going to shift to the right 3 pi over 2. So that means I'm going to take all these x values and I'm going to shift a whole 3 pi over 2 to the right side. So I'm going to take this column of x values and I'm going to add 3 pi over 2 to it. So 0 plus 3 pi over 2 is a 3 pi over 2. Pi over 2 plus 3 pi over 2, that's 4 pi over 2, which is a 2 pi. Pi plus 3 pi over 2. Okay, so pi plus 3 pi over 2. So that's what, 2 pi over 2. So that's 5 pi over 2, right? Okay. 3 pi over 2 plus 3 pi over 2 is 6 pi over a 2, which is just going to be a 3 pi. And then 2 pi plus 3 pi over 2. So it's a 7 pi over 2. So now I have shifted my graph 3 pi over 2 units to the right side. Good deal. Alright, so let's ignore this right here. So sine of 0 is 0. Okay, so my y values are going to be 0, and then we'll be at a 2, at a 0, at a -2, and then back at a 0. Yes? But this +1 right here, this +1, means that I'm going to shift my graph up 1 unit. So it's going to be 0, 3, I can't add. 0 plus 1 is a 1. 0 plus 1 is a 1. -2 plus a 1 is a -1. And 0 plus a 1 is a 1. So these are going to be your x-axis values, and now these are going to be your y-axis values. So I just shifted the graph up 1 unit. So I'm going to have 3 pi over 2, 2 pi, 5 pi over 2, 3 pi, and 7 pi over 2. Okay, so at 3 pi over 2, I'm going to be up, instead of being at 0, I'm going to be up at 1. And then I am going to, at 2 pi here, I'm going to be up at a 3. At 5 pi over 2, I'm going to be back at 1. At 3 pi, I'm going to be down here at a -1. And then it's 7 pi over 2, I'm going to be back up at this one. So if you see that this graph here is your normal sine curve, but it is shifted up 1 unit on the y. Okay. Good deal. Alright, so I want y'all to finish your the worksheet today. It's IP27, and I want you to upload that into Canvas. There's a spot in Canvas for you to upload that. Let me look at it, and then I'll post the solutions at the end of the week. Alright, if y'all have any questions about anything, let me know. Y'all have a good day.